Elvis was in the middle of Burning Love when a commotion in the front section made him stop mid-verse and stare in disbelief. What happened next didn't just change one young woman's life forever. It revolutionized how America treated people with disabilities and created a movement that continues to inspire millions today. It was November 3rd, 1973, at the Astrodome in Houston, Texas. Elvis was performing to a sold-out crowd of 22,000 screaming fans, and the energy was absolutely electric. He'd already worked the audience into a frenzy with "That's All Right," "Hound Dog," and "Jailhouse Rock." Now he was deep into his set, sweat glistening on his forehead, his white jumpsuit catching the stage lights as he moved with that signature swagger that had made him famous. But what Elvis couldn't see from the stage was the drama unfolding in Section A, Row 5. Security guards were trying to stop a young woman in a wheelchair who was attempting to get closer to the stage. The woman was 23-year-old Linda Martinez, and she had been fighting security for the past 10 minutes, determined to reach the front barrier despite the obstacles in her way. Linda Martinez had been paralyzed from the waist down since she was 8 years old. Polio had struck her in 1958, during one of the last major outbreaks before the vaccine became widely available. The disease had taken her ability to walk, but it hadn't touched her spirit or her love for music. Elvis Presley had been her inspiration through years of painful physical therapy, endless doctor visits, and the crushing social isolation that came with being a disabled child in 1960s America. For 15 years, Linda had dreamed of seeing Elvis perform live. But in 1973, most venues weren't equipped for wheelchairs. There were no accessibility requirements, no special seating areas, no accommodations for people with disabilities. Linda had saved money for 2 years working as a telephone operator to afford not just the ticket, but also the modifications needed to her car so she could drive herself to Houston from her small town in Louisiana. The security guards didn't understand why this woman wouldn't stay in her assigned seat in the back of the arena. "Ma'am, you need to return to your section," one of them kept saying, blocking her path. "Wheelchairs aren't allowed in the front rows." But Linda Martinez had come too far and waited too long to be turned away now. She maneuvered her wheelchair around the guards, using skills developed from years of navigating a world that wasn't built for her. Her arms were strong from propelling herself everywhere she went, and her determination was even stronger. "I've been waiting 15 years for this," Linda called out over the music. "I'm not going to watch Elvis from the back row when I finally get my chance." As Elvis reached the climax of Burning Love, he noticed the disturbance in the front section. At first, he thought it was just overzealous fans trying to get closer to the stage, something that happened at every concert. But as he looked more carefully, he saw something that made him stop singing entirely. A young woman in a wheelchair was being restrained by 3 security guards while she fought to get closer to the stage. Elvis had seen plenty of chaos at his concerts over the years, but this was different. This wasn't a drunk fan or an aggressive heckler. This was someone who clearly needed help, and the security team was treating her like a problem to be solved rather than a human being with rights and dignity. Elvis set down his microphone and walked to the edge of the stage. The band, confused by his sudden stop, gradually ceased playing. The entire Astrodome began to quiet as 22,000 people sensed that something unusual was happening. "Hold on there," Elvis called out, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system as he pointed toward the commotion. "What's going on down there?" The security guards froze, suddenly aware that they had become part of the show. Linda Martinez looked up at Elvis with tears of frustration streaming down her face, hardly believing that the king of rock and roll was actually acknowledging her situation. "They won't let me get close enough to see you," Linda called out, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "I came all the way from Louisiana, and they're making me sit in the back because I'm in a wheelchair." Elvis stared down at Linda for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. "Ma'am," Elvis said, his voice now carrying clearly through the arena, "did you say they won't let you come closer because you're in a wheelchair?" "Yes," Linda replied, finding her voice. "They said wheelchairs aren't allowed in the front sections, but I can see just fine from my chair. I just want to be close enough to really see you perform." Elvis looked at the security guards with an expression that made it clear he was not pleased with what he was hearing. Then he looked back at Linda and made a decision that would shock everyone in the Astrodome and make headlines around the world. "Well, that's just not right," Elvis announced to the entire arena. "Security, I want you to help this young lady get to the very front row. Right now." The arena erupted in applause, but Elvis wasn't finished. As the security guards reluctantly helped Linda navigate to the front barrier, Elvis walked to the center of the stage and addressed his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you something," Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion. "This young lady just taught me something important about courage and determination. She came all the way from Louisiana to see this show, and she wasn't going to let anyone tell her she couldn't sit where she wanted to sit just because she's in a wheelchair." Elvis gestured toward Linda, who was now positioned at the front barrier, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I want everyone in this arena to look at her and remember what real strength looks like. It's not about how fast you can run or how high you can jump. It's about never giving up on your dreams, no matter what obstacles people put in your way." The crowd gave Linda a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But Elvis had an even bigger surprise in store. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Elvis called out to Linda. "Linda Martinez," she replied, her voice shaking with emotion. "Well, Linda Martinez," Elvis said with that famous smile, "I've got a question for you. Would you like to come up here on stage with me?" The Astrodome went absolutely silent. In 1973, it was unprecedented for a performer of Elvis's stature to invite an audience member onto the stage, let alone someone in a wheelchair. Stage accessibility didn't exist. There were no ramps, no elevators, no accommodations for people with disabilities. But Elvis Presley had never been someone who accepted limitations when they got in the way of doing what was right. "Boys," Elvis said to his band, "help me figure out how to get Linda up here." What happened next had never been attempted in the history of major arena concerts. Elvis's road crew, working with Linda's guidance, fashioned a makeshift ramp using stage equipment and wooden platforms. Elvis himself came down into the audience to help coordinate the effort, refusing to continue the show until they found a way to make the stage accessible. It took 15 minutes, but eventually, Linda Martinez became the first person in a wheelchair to join Elvis Presley on stage during a live performance. When Linda reached the stage level, Elvis took her hand and looked into her eyes. "Linda," he said, speaking softly but into the microphone so the entire arena could hear, "you've shown more courage tonight than most people show in a lifetime. Would you do me the honor of letting me sing a song just for you?" Linda nodded, unable to speak through her tears of joy. Elvis began playing "Love Me Tender" on his acoustic guitar, but instead of standing at his microphone, he sat down on the edge of the stage next to Linda's wheelchair. As he sang, he maintained eye contact with her, making it clear that this performance was entirely for her. When the song ended, Elvis did something that would become one of the most iconic moments in entertainment history. He asked Linda Martinez to dance with him. "I know you can't stand up," Elvis said gently, "but that doesn't mean we can't dance. May I have this dance, Linda?" Elvis began playing "Can't Help Falling in Love" while slowly moving Linda's wheelchair in time with the music. He spun her gently, guided her in graceful movements, and made her feel like she was floating across the most elegant ballroom rather than sitting on a concert stage. As they danced, something magical happened in the Astrodome. 22,000 people began swaying to the music, many of them crying as they watched Elvis transform Linda's wheelchair from a symbol of limitation into a vehicle of grace and beauty. "You're beautiful, Linda," Elvis whispered as they continued their dance. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't do something just because you do it differently than other people." When the song ended, Elvis made an announcement that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice carrying throughout the arena, "I want to make something very clear. From now on, every Elvis Presley concert will be accessible to people with disabilities. Every venue, every show, every performance. Because music is for everyone. And no one should be denied the chance to experience it just because they face different challenges than the rest of us." The crowd's response was deafening. But more importantly, Elvis's declaration started a movement that spread throughout the entertainment industry. Within months, major venues across the country were retrofitting their facilities to accommodate wheelchairs and other mobility devices. Other performers began following Elvis's example, making their concerts accessible and welcoming to people with disabilities. The concept of universal accessibility in entertainment venues was born from that November night in Houston. Linda Martinez's life was transformed in ways that extended far beyond that magical evening. The confidence and validation she gained from Elvis's recognition gave her the strength to pursue dreams she had never dared to imagine. She enrolled in college, became a physical therapist specializing in working with disabled children, and eventually opened her own rehabilitation center. But perhaps most importantly, Linda became an advocate for disability rights, using her experience with Elvis as a platform to speak about the importance of inclusion and accessibility. She testified before Congress about the need for disability accommodation laws and worked with architects and engineers to design more accessible public spaces. The footage of Elvis dancing with Linda Martinez became one of the most requested clips in television history. Talk shows, documentaries, and news programs featured the story repeatedly, helping to change public perceptions about people with disabilities and their right to participate fully in society. Elvis continued his commitment to accessibility for the rest of his career. Every subsequent concert included reserved accessible seating, ramped entrances, and staff trained to assist people with disabilities. Elvis personally reviewed venue plans to ensure they met accessibility standards, often paying for modifications out of his own pocket when venues couldn't afford them. He also established the Linda Martinez Foundation for Disability Access, which provided funding for accessibility improvements at schools, community centers, and entertainment venues across the country. The foundation also offered scholarships to students with disabilities pursuing careers in music, therapy, and advocacy. Elvis regularly invited people with disabilities to join him on stage at his concerts, making it a signature element of his performances. Each time, he would tell the story of Linda Martinez and remind his audiences that courage comes in many forms. The ripple effects of that November night continued long after Elvis's death in 1977. When the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, advocates specifically cited Elvis's pioneering efforts in entertainment accessibility as an early example of what was possible when society chose inclusion over exclusion. Linda Martinez, who by then had become Dr. Linda Martinez and was running a successful rehabilitation center, was invited to the White House for the ADA signing ceremony. She brought with her a photograph from that night in Houston, Elvis spinning her wheelchair on stage while 22,000 people watched in awe. "That night changed everything for me," Dr. Martinez said in her remarks at the ceremony. "But more than that, it changed how America thought about people like me. Elvis didn't see my wheelchair as a limitation. He saw it as just another way of being human. And when 22,000 people watched him treat me with dignity and respect, they learned something important about how we should treat each other." Today, the Linda Martinez wing of the Houston Rehabilitation Center treats hundreds of patients each year. The facility, which specializes in helping young people with physical disabilities develop confidence and independence, features a music therapy program that uses Elvis Presley's songs as a cornerstone of treatment. The walls are lined with photographs from that historic night at the Astrodome, and every patient learns the story of the young woman who refused to accept limitations and the superstar who recognized her courage. At Graceland, visitors can see a special exhibit dedicated to Elvis's work in disability advocacy. The centerpiece is Linda's original wheelchair from that night in 1973. Along with letters from thousands of people whose lives were changed by Elvis's commitment to accessibility and inclusion. A plaque in the exhibit reads, "Elvis Presley proved that true greatness isn't measured by fame or fortune, but by the willingness to use your platform to lift others up and make the world more inclusive for everyone." The story of Elvis and Linda Martinez reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply treat others with dignity and respect. Elvis could have ignored the commotion in the front row that night. He could have let security handle the situation and continued with his show. Instead, he chose to see Linda Martinez as a person worthy of respect and inclusion, and in doing so, he changed not just her life, but the lives of millions of people with disabilities who came after her. Sometimes revolution begins not with grand gestures or political movements, but with one person's decision to do what's right, regardless of convention or convenience. Elvis Presley's dance with Linda Martinez lasted only 4 minutes, but its impact continues to resonate more than 50 years later, reminding us all that music and life truly is for everyone. The young woman who refused to accept a seat in the back row became a doctor, an advocate, and a pioneer. The superstar who recognized her courage became a champion for inclusion and accessibility. And together, they proved that when we choose compassion over convention, we don't just change individual lives, we change the world.